Um, so today is going to be a panel discussion, and Nina Hayes and Suntrace Williams Maynard are our two panelists. Ladies, thank you so much for joining us. Their bios were sent with your invitation, so hopefully you read about these two wonderful women who are doing this for us. If you have not done so, please add your name, your organization, and your email to the chat so that we can record who's doing this. Also, Trista did the tool, so thank you so much for doing the tool. And each time we meet, we're going to try to follow up on homework and figure out where we are and what we need to help them do. And without further ado, Catherine Pittman, who is with the United Way, is going to take over the show from here. Thanks, Catherine.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for being here. Thank you, Nina and Suntrace. And today, as you all know, we are talking about recruiting and retaining diverse workforce. And some organizations seem to have it easier, some don't. So we want to talk to the experts in this and see what they have to tell us. So we're basically going to talk about three things. We're going to talk about recruitment, hiring, and retention. So I'm just going to ask a question. You both can chime in. So to start off, how do we as employers attract a qualified, diverse pool of candidates for our, and we're kind of talking nonprofit organizations. Most everybody here, if not everybody, is from a nonprofit organization.
One of the things that I think it is so important is that we reach out. One place is some of our junior colleges. At one time, years ago, they would have specific job fairs, teacher job fairs. Now they just have job fairs. And when we go into those fairs, they have people from the military, people from just all different areas that come in to look for jobs. Engineers, it's not just one specific type of employee. They call it a job fair. That's so important. One of the ways that we find it within Mobile County Public School System is when we go to places like Livingston, to University of Alabama, because they are wanting to come to a Mobile. It's not too far from where they live in Sumter or some of those areas, but they have more opportunities here. So to go to some of the smaller areas, and in those schools, you are going to have a diverse population of people. Another thing that we do as a system, we advertise. There's the East Coast Migrant Head Start Project. With those they work with children 0 to 4 years old. So what we do is we post advertisement because their parents are going to need jobs. So when we need interpreters for our schools, or when we need paraprofessionals, English as second language, those type, we use East Coast. There's also Spring Hill College has a Foley Center, and that's for ESL. They teach adult classes on ESL. Many times we can pull very good employees from that area that we have. And there's also an agency called The Loan, and they work as well with a diverse population. And so we post our advertisements in those areas.
Awesome. Suntrace, what do you think about, some ideas?
Absolutely. And first, I want to say thank you for having me, and to piggyback off of some of the things that Nina had talked about. I think it is so important to be creative in where you're looking for talent, right? And she talked about some of that. So you want to establish key partnerships with organizations from which to recruit. So you have to look at who you're partnering with, create that intentional outreach plan, whether you're partnering with minority serving institutions such as your HBCUs, whether you're partnering with your military installations, your state vocational rehabilitation agencies, because you have to think about all of that, because diversity is so much more than just one protected class. So you got to make sure you're looking at how you can basically get out the widest net, cast the widest net possible. Right. And then another thing I think it's so important to be mindful of, and sometimes I know I do, we can forget the little details. And when you're trying to attract a diverse applicant pool, we also have to look at what we're doing. And what I mean by that is take a look at your job description, like starting there, looking at the language in that job description to make sure that intentional, unintentional, that we're not excluding anyone. And what I mean by that, for example, really study what the job is, because sometimes we use templates or material that's really outdated, and we may have, do you have the ability to lift 50 pounds? And the job doesn't even require you to really lift 50 pounds. And we're not thinking about it because it's just something that's been there. So you want to really think about those essential functions of the job and make sure that it's captured accurately in that job description, so we're not excluding anyone in particular. Also, I like to say, we have to be careful with our branding. And what I mean by that is our messaging. Right? Look at your marketing materials. I believe Nina mentioned job fairs. And if you're attending a job fair and you have marketing material, what does that look like? If it is all of one thing or one group of people, then be mindful that that could be in message that you're sending, not knowing you're sending it, right? Where someone say, oh, I'm not photographed there. I can't see myself fitting into that organization. So when you're creating this material, you want to make sure you're diverse in those efforts so that anyone can see themselves, fitting in. So you got to be mindful of that. And then the last takeaway that I would say from a recruitment standpoint is I always say, and I think about myself at Adams and Reese, sometimes the best people to tell your story are your very own people, right? So what I mean by that, my grandmother, God rest her soul, would make this comment when I was a kid: you got to clean up your own house before you clean up someone else's. And I had no clue what she was talking about. Like, what are you talking about, girl? You trying to put me back to work and clean up something else? But what she meant was you have to have an internal viewpoint sometimes before you start trying to do things externally. So you got to look at inside, and are your people, do they reflect diversity where they can go out and tell your story? Because what's reflected on the inside, a lot of times will then come, that's what you're going to ultimately get. So I think that those are some good takeaways to piggyback off some of the things that Nina mentioned.
I agree totally with Santrice. What I always say to our people is recruitment is an inside job. That means that it starts inside. Whatever your clientele, when they come in, what do they see? How do you treat the employees that you have under the roof? One of the things that, anywhere USA, we have what we call a street committee. And that committee is they are nameless and faceless, but they are going to tell your story as well. When I went in, it took 10 minutes for someone to acknowledge me, or I didn't get my answer that I needed. Even if it's the employee, they don't treat us right, they work us to death. They, even with a Zoom meeting, like if you have no Zoom meeting, every time a person click on to speak to that person and say, do you know everybody? You're just making it as inviting as possible. It's intentional. And that is number one. Before you start reaching out, as Santrice said, you've got to clean up. So I consider it as an inside job, and everyone that walks in is a person that helps you to recruit, because they're going to go out and tell their story. Whatever they perceive that story to be, that is what they are going to tell. So that's so important.
Yes, I agree with that. To have that frontline person you know, that's there and inviting and welcoming to anyone who walks in the door is so important. I mean, I remember going to interviews in different places, and that really just seals in your impression. It's your first impression.
Exactly.
You know what, Catherine, and on that same note, it's very important too, when you're talking about the recruiting efforts, because what you just said, when you walk in and what you see, even the hiring panel, it's very important that you get a diverse group of people that's sitting on that hiring panel. And I want to say too, and I hear this a lot from clients when I'm guiding clients through this, because I want to put this out there. I know this is all well-intentioned, but you have to make sure you do this stuff legal. There have been companies that we've seen that have had the best of intention. If you don't do this thing right with consulting with your HR director or your legal counsel, you can find your best intentions getting yourself in trouble. And I want to say, setting quotas, do not do. Look, I'm giving y'all a little bit of legal advice, right? Do not set quotas, but there's nothing wrong with setting goals. And making sure that hiring panel's diverse, and even requiring a diverse slate. It's nothing wrong with that. So I think it all goes into with ensuring your recruitment efforts are as wide as possible.
And another thing we have not spoken about is the incentives. You can partner with some apartment complexes. So if there are potential employees who are coming in, and you can partner with them to say that they will not have to pay any first or last month's rent, or 10% off. So even though we may not be paying the salary that they want, if we can partner with some apartment complexes to get some discounts for them if they're moving into the city, or if they're getting ready to get an apartment, we can have some things that way, as well as offering, I think Sandries mentioned it once before in a meeting, that if we can get some loan forgiveness, some federal loan forgiveness for college students. And that just basically takes writing for thee. And with being a nonprofit, I think that it would be a wonderful candidate for you to receive loan forgiveness for college students. And with that, you can say, if you stay with us 5 years, then the loan could set a time, 3 to 5 years, for them to be there with you, so that they will be able to get the loan forgiveness. There are so many organizations. I know Franklin does it, and other medical areas, when doctors graduate and they have these enormous college bills. If they work at Franklin or a place like Franklin for a certain amount of years, then their loans are forgiven. So those are the kinds of things that maybe the nonprofits should look at as well.
Those are great. So basically, just to quickly recap, you know, your branding message is so important. You know, just, you know, get others to look at it, get someone else to, you know, check it out other than your eyes, and just to be sure. And the language in your job description, you know, I totally agree with that. I know that I've been working personally on the job description that I have, and trying to make it more inclusive and descriptive. Sometimes it gets a little bogged down. You don't have to have all every teeny tiny detail, because that's what meeting in person or via Zoom interviews is about, to really talk about those details. So thank you. So let's move on into hiring strategies. We talked about, you know, how we can recruit, but what are some of the items when we're hiring? Is there anything that we want to avoid when trying to implement a diverse and equitable and inclusive environment? Is there anything that we should be avoiding?
I'm going to start off with the legal answer.
That's good.
you know, and coming from EEOC before I joined Adams and Reese, and everyone talks about Title VII, and because you do not want to get yourself in trouble. And of course, EEOC recommends that all of those things, the hiring process should be done without regard to any protected characteristic. However, on the same token, you can still balance ways to promote diversity. And, you know, we talk about Title VII and the history of Title VII. It was born from the Civil Rights Act. And if we really look at the historical standpoint and understand the legislative intent, we don't want to, you know, they still don't want you to say, well, we cannot do certain things, because you can. You can voluntarily do affirmative action programs. And I know affirmative action is like, oh, you know, you get this bad feeling and people, you know, think of it as a negative, you know, concept. But really the way in which it was, at least the mindset before, is very different now. And there's guidance and ways in which to do it correctly. So I just say at the end of the day, when you're making your decision from a hiring perspective, one, you want to be consistent, right? You want to be consistent in applying whatever standard you're applying, you know, looking at your job description, if this person can fulfill whatever job duties you're needing that individual to do. You're being consistent, your communication is clear and concise, and your decision is made based on the totality of the circumstances, what that person brings to the table. And I say that to say, because then you're not making a judgment or decision based on race, gender, or any other protected characteristic. But it's so important that, like Nina and I talked about earlier, if your recruiting efforts are what it needs to be, where you're casting a wide net, ultimately you're going to interview a diverse group of people and then make that hiring decision in a way in which you're supposed to do so legally. So the whole goal is get that diverse, you know, group, and then you just make your decision. It's at the end of the day, even with those affirmative action programs, you're still picking the most qualified person. The thing with DE&I is when we are not inclusive and we're not casting that wide net, well, we can't interview a diverse group of people to ultimately hope, you know, to get more diverse in the workforce. So at least I just want to start off with that little legal tidbit from an EEOC perspective.
Not making it obvious is basically what Sonya's saying. We are looking for diversity. Let's just put that out there. But we are not going to make it obvious. We're going to interview everybody. At one point, I had some principals to say, well, I need an African-American for this job. Or if it's a physical ed, they will just put out there, I need a male because I have a female. But you can't, you know, not making that obvious. That may be what you are looking for, but you are not going to say that to the potential employee. And what I've done is when I'm interviewing, especially when I go to universities or wherever I am, if I see someone that I'm looking for, I talk and I'm excited, and I only put a little star, a little red star, a little mark on that resume for me. And it's just for me and for my eyes only. And so when I get back to the office and start to have interviews, I make sure that I interview those star resumes in that. I'm going to interview some others, but I'm interviewing the star ones that I think that meets the qualification. It's almost like it's their job to lose. So I'm not just going to give it to them because of that, but when they come in and we interview and they meet the standards, the job description, what we're looking for, then certainly that would be a person that I would consider and push out to put to the board to be hired.
Mm-hmm. You know, my experience, and not just hiring people where I've worked, but I've seen throughout the community instances where, you know, that wide net was cast and then no one was hired. And do you have any suggestions about that? and especially trying to hire a diversity that you are looking for. I
We
mean,
stay, we stay close to home. We talked about this, Teresa and I, earlier, that at one time we would fly to New York and Chicago, and when I say Alabama, they would say, Alabama? I'm not coming to Alabama. And they would not come to Alabama. But if I would go, I mentioned earlier, to Livingston, they are close enough to be home, and they're wanting to get, but they can drive home in an hour and a half on Friday evening once the school day is over, and stay until Monday morning if they want to. So a lot of our recruitment is done right here at South Alabama. Not only that, with growing our own, I go to a lot of the Upward Bound classes at the University of South Alabama, Bishop State, and they are 11th and 12th grade students. So therefore, I mentioned these are the things we're looking for. And in 2 years, if they go to Bishop State, they're prepared to be a paraprofessional or clerk. And so to go early and to grow your own helps as well. And the way we do that is start with our high school students, whether it's in the Upward Bound program. We have students that come in the summer to work here in central office and give them an idea of what the job is like. So they are like student workers during the summer, and many of them come back. So we have to not only look at where we're going to get people, we're also wanting to look at people that we can groom and prepare for the job that's right in our backyards instead of going so far out.
that's a great point. Working with interns that you might work with, summer interns, here in Mobile, we have so many programs that the county does with high school students, and the city does one as well. And that would be my advice, even though I'm not on the panel, is to take advantage, take advantage of those young students that are so eager to learn. And
not only are we looking at them, they're looking at us too.
right.
That way it comes back to you guys in a work environment, a welcoming environment, a warm environment that would make them want to come back. But if they get there and they hear all the yin and they hear the employees complaining, I can't believe she wants me to do that. I can't, well, they're not going to want to stay. So it's a two-way street. You are, observing them, but they are observing you as well. So you want to make it be that they feel like, I would like to work in a place like that. And I said this earlier, we have some schools where we never have teachers or who want to leave. They stay there until they retire. My own story, when I was teaching, I was at a school that was a wonderful school, and when it was time for me to get my counseling position, I said to my mother, I don't want to leave Mr. Knight. He is so nice. She said, if you don't leave him, he's gonna leave you. Somebody's gonna leave somebody, but just thank God you've had the opportunity and the training and move on. But that is what you want your employees to say, even if it's a promotion or even if it's more money, you want them to say, I really don't want to leave. I really like this. They are nice to us. The supervisor was there when my mother was sick, or the supervisor came by my home to visit or drop off a cake. Just little things like that will help them feel like they are welcome. And it is, because it is your work family. When you think about it, that's your work family. So you want to create an environment that is warm and conducive, that they want to be there.
That's awesome.
And Catherine, that goes back to what we were talking about earlier. earlier, your messaging, what messaging is being put out when you were talking about having to start the search all over, right? Where you casted this wide net and you still don't have that fit. And sometimes it just requires going back to the drawing board. And that's okay, reevaluating what it is that you did and figure out if there's some things you need to tweak or change, right? Maybe it was that job description, right? We got to look at what it was. And before we get on another topic, it came to mind about the hiring, when you asked about the hiring question. One of the things we're seeing that's been talked about in the DE&I world with hiring too is this concept of blind resumes. Basically, and I make the joke, and I think we may have had this conversation earlier. My mother named me Suntrese Wanique Williams. Thank you, Mama. It was Suntrese or Tanella. And I say that to say because, as much as I love Suntrese, there's stereotypes that come along with that name. And there have been studies to show too, where certain names can make people think of certain races, and obviously too can even give away to gender roles too. So now they're coming up with redacting certain things on a resume that will allow a person to look at that individual just solely based on their qualifications and not being able to make the assumption as to race or gender. So that could be a thing too. And another thing that we're seeing in the DE&I world as well is the development of a review committee. And what that is a separate committee to kind of go over what the hiring officials did, kind of be, basically holding them accountable. Because why wasn't someone selected? Was it really because no one was qualified, or whether there were some biases that existed? Because at the end of the day, when we're talking about DE&I, we have to, one, acknowledge that we all have biases, and it's okay to have someone to hold us accountable and keep us in line. So make sure too that we're doing those things in the process.
Of course. Another thing I think is important for supervisors to do, as we were talking, I was thinking that and at some point, if you've got 10 minutes and you pass by a desk of a worker, to stop and say, what are you doing? Let me help you. And that too is developing. What happened?
You're there.
Am I here? Okay,
Yeah,
I just don't see me.
Here.
Okay, there we go. Well, I think. But anyway, but to say, can I help you? And during that little short time, you can say, well, how is Susie, the daughter? How's Susie doing? Just a few minutes to talk to them, and that's creating that bond together and move on. And you don't have time to do that every day, I'm sure. But again, you are building a work family. That is so important, because when I do exit interviews, that's the thing that I hear. I felt so good about being there. Or maybe if the principal was a little bit more approachable, that it would work better. So it's something that we have to be intentional about. I keep going back to that because I can't stress it enough. We are wanting to have a stable workforce. We don't want a revolving door. And one of the number one ways to have a workforce that's stable and want to be there with you is to have a workplace that they want to come.
Yes. After all, we spend most of our time at work.
Exactly.
We're not asleep. So thank you. And that segues kind of into our third part of retention. Once you've hired the great person that you want and that adds diversity of whatever kind. So what value, in your opinions, does a diverse workforce bring to the work table, to the work environment? What are some of the pluses that you all have seen?
Studies obviously show you're going to have more ideas. You're going to get more innovation, right? When you have a diverse group. So, I mean, the pros behind diversity really, it's just limitless. And, when we're talking about diversity, it's so important too, when we're understanding DE&I are all very different things. You know, when this whole thing first started, it was always just diversity. And that's just one piece of the pie, right? You got to make sure you're pushing all three, because I often say it's one thing to have a seat at the table. You know, you can be present. It's another thing to have a voice at the table. But then there's another thing to actually have a voice that's heard. And you got to get to all three of those things: having a seat at the table, having a voice, and having that voice heard. And so you got to work with all of those things. And when you have that, I mean, you're going to see productivity. You're going to see, I know in nonprofit, it's not necessarily about, you know, making money and increasing sales and all of those things, but your mission at the end of the day, you know, what you're doing, people are going to look, do we want to contribute to this nonprofit? Because are they doing things that's, you know, diverse? Do they have a diverse board and their staff, their volunteers? So I think it will behoove any nonprofit when you're asking for dollars, especially because now you need the dollars coming in, but then what the community in which you're serving too. So I mean, diversity is so important given the work that all of you do. It only can help promote what you're doing. As some beginning points. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah. I agree totally. That is certainly what we want to have, and especially, and all of us, well, many of us have been to tables where there's been a discussion and they're shaking their head and looking at you and agreeing. But when we walk away from the table and the packet is complete, nothing that you said was important. So at some point, we shut down, and we don't want that to happen. And we just shut down. Why am I going? Because, and so if you're there, then you're just sitting there. Therefore, now you've got someone saying they're not going to listen to you. They've got their people that they want. So you want everybody to be a part, and they need to know that their opinion matters.
Yeah, it makes me think about, I had this experience where I was making a suggestion to some colleagues, and supervisors were there. This is not at my current job. I don't want to put that disclaimer out there. And I was like, what about this? And, you know, no one said anything. And then a male said something very similar, actually the same thing, just in different words. It's like, oh, that's a great idea. You know, and I'm thinking to myself, that was my idea, just said in a different way. And, you know, at the time, before I'm as wise as I am now, I was upset. And like Nina said, you can make your employees shut down and clam up. And I'm a Cancer, so it's crabs. We get in our shell. You know, I'm a July baby. And that just doesn't do well, because at the end of the day, you want people to come up with ideas. And that's what we were just talking about. You're going to get more ideas, more innovation. But if you do things like that and everyone isn't given that opportunity, or you're attributing, you know, something to someone else, right? It can create problems, because you need all of your people to feel appreciated and valued. You know, I often say this DE&I work is a challenge, but DE&I sustainability is tough. It is tough, but you gotta be willing to do the job, and it can be done. It can be done.
And I started thinking when both of you were talking, and going back to what Nina was saying, is creating that atmosphere, that welcoming atmosphere. And, you know, I used to love to, you know, talk to people about, you know, kind of take some time, maybe if it's once a week or once every 2 weeks. Yes, we're all busy. And, you know, it's so hard to take time away from what you have to get done at work. But I feel like it's such an important piece to take some time to get to know people. You know, talk about a tradition in your family, and do other people that you work with have traditions? Because I know for me, it makes me grow and to learn about other people's traditions in a different way than I've always known. And I think when you do get to know people better, if they're willing to share some of that, you don't have to share anything deep, but just something goofy. How did you learn to ride a bike or something? If you did, you know, I think it makes your work product so much better and more efficient. you know, everybody's trusting everybody. Everybody's willing to help if you can in your jobs. And I love that idea of, you know, your work home is your family. So do you, Suntrace or Nina, have any other comments? A last minute or two, and then we're going to open up for some questions from our audience.
The main thing I can't stress enough is that environment. I remember just a quick story. My principal made the best candy. So he would bring us little Ziploc bags of candy sometimes, and he would pass it out in the mornings and have a sweet day. So I carried my candy home, and my mother enjoyed it, so we would eat it. And the next morning or two, I think, I was in the lounge and I said to some teachers, well, my mother ate most of my candy. She likes it too. Well, the next time Mr. Knight made candy, he came and gave me a little Ziploc bag, and he said, here's a Ziploc bag for your mother. And she was on the phone telling her friends, Nina Principal sent me candy. But just to, when you hear something, then if you act on it, now I had her friend called her about a year later. What's the name of the school that Nina works? I want my daughter to interview at that school. So that's recruitment. And that's what happened. And she told her, and my mother said, well, Miss Jones wants Nancy to work with you. You think that you're going to be able to talk with Mr. Knight, but now that's a recruitment. Just such a little small thing as a Ziploc bag with about 4 or 5 pieces of candy. Look how far that traveled. So just things, just small things in your workplace certainly will help you to, that's recruitment.
You know, Nina has aroused my appetite during this lunch hour talking about cookies. But, you know, it makes me think of one of the things I often say when we have these DE&I talks. And I often say, being, you know, a girl from the South, and I know I'm small in frame, you all cannot see me, but I love to eat. I am the ultimate foodie, whether it looks like it or not. And those of us that love to cook, we know you got to have that seasoning, that salt and pepper, you know, to have that perfect flavor. And I often say that's the same thing in your workplace. You got to have black, white, and everything in between to have that perfect blend, to get that perfect flavor. Now I made all of you hungry talking about food, but you know, that's what we need. And Nina mentioned recruitment, and that's great. And when you're recruiting, that stuff takes time. It also takes resources. And so you want a good ROI, good return on your investment. So once you reach that recruitment, you want to make sure you can retain your people. And so that's why you have to look at both things and making sure, as I mentioned earlier, that your people are feeling valued. That's how you retain them. And, you know, just the messaging. And people often say too, it starts at the top. I want to also just encourage you all too. It doesn't just start at the top. You got to look at your middle, your managers. Are they fostering an inclusive environment? Like Nina said, are they creating that safe space? So all of that. And then we should never assume that managers know how to do that. So we got to make sure we're training our people to do that so that they can be successful at it. And just the final, I guess, takeaway for me is to say, celebrate your small wins. Like I said earlier, this is tough, it is challenging, and you may want to just throw in the towel and go eat you some cookies. But, you know, at the end of the day, you really have to hang in there and celebrate those small wins, because those small steps at some point will become big steps. In leaps and bounds, you'll be looking at that you're really accomplishing a lot more. So, I mean, just stay encouraged and inspired, and don't give up. And this climate right now is perfect for doing it. So.
All right. So thank you both so much. That's incredible information. I feel like some people may have questions. If you want, you can put your questions in the chat box, and we will send them out. if you'd rather just speak up, please, you can do that as well. Yes, Amy?
Hey, I had a quick question. Centrise, thank you, and Nina, both again for being with us today. It's been so wonderful to work through this process and hear y'all's thoughts. One thing I had considered, but we're a small staff team, small organization, small business, and I don't have an HR department. I don't have legal counsel. You should probably be our legal counsel. But I love the idea of, I am about to hire a position and put it out there. And so this has been great timing because I really want to try, to do things different and better than I have historically maybe done. But the blind resume, I don't know how, if I'm the only if I'm getting the resume, if it's me, how with a small organization you could implement that step or that process. Do you have any suggestions?
Absolutely. I mean, even if you're a small agency, if you know that you're the decision maker, then get somebody else. If it's more than one of you, right, at least there's a second person, get that person to just redact the names or anything that's gender specific and make sure that that person does not tell you anything about it, right? So you just have to hold each other accountable and you tell that person, you're the collector of the resume so that you can redact accordingly. And then you give me the stack once that's done. So that's all. I mean, you use the resources that you have and make the most of it. So you don't need a whole team to get that part done.
Great. Fantastic. Thank you.
My pleasure, Amy.
Okay, so we had someone ask, love learning through others' stories. Can you share some other success stories?
Oh my goodness, I have so many, especially, and as everyone knows, you have a resume that I've basically been in a school system my entire career, just from teacher to counselor. And one of the things that's always been successful is that, again, that if you are out there and we have a family. I can remember when I first moved in my apartment, I was 30 and had not gone away to college. So it's a big thing. Well, all of the teachers of my grade level came to my apartment and bought ferns and food after work. And so now this is my work family that's coming to see me. And we sat and talked and they encouraged me that I had done the right thing. So now when I go back to work, I want to be with my work family, my grade level. So anytime that you can develop a relationship, one of my principals, I shared this story earlier when my mother had open heart surgery. She came to the hospital and sat the entire time holding my hand. And once my mother was moved to intensive care, she went and got the Arby's beef and cheddar because she knew that I liked that, and drink, and came back and she sat and ate. But I did not want to leave any of my school. I didn't want to leave that school because it was clean, it was inviting, all of the staff members, but we had the role model because we saw it in the principal and the assistant principal. So it trickles down. That's why it's so important that you have a warm and inviting workplace. It trickles down. Even the parents, when they would come in, they would be dressed well, they would speak well, they would listen, because that is the environment that was set. It is so important that we do that, especially now in what we're living in now, this COVID and everything else is going on. Mental health is on the rise, and we hear that all of the time. So when they walk into a building or you see someone, you don't know their story and you don't know what they've been through this year. So just a smile and a kind word can not only help with your recruitment, but it can help them to feel better or to change their mindset. So to keep our eyes open when anyone enters our workplace for a job or for service or whatever, let's make them feel as important as we can, because that is the number one way of just everything, retaining, recruiting, hiring, or even to just make someone else better. That is basically the mission for a lot of our nonprofits, is to help people. So that is one of the best ways that I think that we can help anyone that comes into to make them feel special.
Love it. Does anyone else have any questions of the panel or anything? Or do any of the agencies, I see a lot of agencies here and board members of agencies. Do any of y'all have anything you would like to share as far as a success story, either where you are now or where you've been? No?
They'll all speak
Well,
at
this is
once.
this is Diane.
Hey, Diane.
I personally feel like, don't take this the wrong way, but I feel like I am a success story. I often tell people about when I was working at a previous employer, and they actively pursued me, asked me to submit my resume, considered me among other candidates, put me in a position of leadership over time. And when I had an emergency in my family, gave me such extreme grace. I don't think I would have made it through that time in my life if it had not been for my supervisors there, Clara Esther and Brenda Carlisle. I don't think I would have made it through. But I'm still here today because of what they were able to help me with. Like when you say a work family, that was my experience. So I am a diversity success story.
That's awesome. Thank you. Anyone else? All right. Suntrace, did you have something you wanted to say?
Well, it wasn't in line with the question, but if no one else had any other comments or questions, it made me think of that poll that you started off with. I didn't know if you were going to reveal the responses or not, but I know I had thought about a couple of questions for you all to consider when creating a DE&I assessment plan for your nonprofit. For you all to just kind of consider if we had a significant, or not even a significant, but if we had some no's, I would love to throw out some things for people to consider. I don't know if are we going to get a reveal of the poll or?
All right, I want to turn it back over to Trista.
Not to jump the gun.
I didn't operate the poll. I'm not that talented. That is our very trusty Trista.
Ah, yes, I can
To
share
my left.
results.
Is there a poll reveal?
Yes. So yes, it's kind of like half and half. But kind of what Jill shared in the beginning is this is the process. So we were trying just to gauge where everyone is in this process. So Suntrace, yes, if you have any advice, please share, because we would love to have it.
You know, and I was just looking, and I believe I saw lack of time probably was a contributing factor. And I know it is so hard for nonprofits that have a small staff. My family and I just started up a national nonprofit, and it's just 4 of us. And it is very tough, when you have just few staff, few volunteers. But my grandmother, I'm going to quote her again, would often tell me, you make time for what you want to make time for. So we're going to have to maybe shift some priorities or see what we can do away with a little bit so that we can focus on this because of the pros with diversity, right? DE&I as a whole. So maybe some of the things that you all may want to consider when you're creating your plans. Think about how transparent your nonprofit wish to be about whatever steps you're taking to become more diverse. And encourage some inclusive practices. You want to think about if your organization is going to communicate your values to the public, or if it's just paid staff of your, or your volunteers. So when you're creating this, kind of think broader. Also, you may want to think about if your organizational values will be published on your nonprofit's website or otherwise shared in some kind of public forum. Are you going to make your DE&I commitment more inward facing, outward facing, or kind of a combination of both? You also may want to think about, does your nonprofit create opportunities to listen to voices directly from the community, any grassroots, young leaders in your marginalized communities or underserved or low income environments? Kind of start thinking about that. We talked about recruitment as well during the time. You want to think about how can your nonprofit open its board recruitment and staff hiring pipelines to talented candidates from those underrepresented groups. I think it's so important too, is if your organization's commitment to DE&I, is it part of the orientation message for your new board members? And I say this because a lot of times, I don't know how you, if you do your board staggered, and are you doing that commitment and you're sharing that with your new board members? So you're incorporating that also in your onboarding process with any new teammates or volunteers. Because once you put in all the work, you want to make sure that your new people are getting it too. So you just want to make sure you're doing that, and looking at too, if you want, how you're going to assess the progress that you're making towards your goals with DE&I. What does success look like for your group, your organization? So you even want to maybe start there. Probably should have started with that. You know, what does it look like? What is it that you want to create for your organization based on your mission, based on the community in which you serve? And then determine, when you do that, how you're going to accomplish it and how you're going to assess your progress along the way. So at least for those of you who are still working on these assessments, these are just maybe some ideas and thoughts that you can have in your mind as you're creating those along the way. Yep.
One of the questions that was asked on that, we talked about policies and procedures. I think, again, it's so important for everyone, all of the stakeholders, to know what your policies and procedures are. One of the biggest things that we have to deal with now as society is technology. So you want to emphasize that your employees, everyone that's a part of your organization, that they watch what they post on Facebook and all kinds of media, that makes sure that everything is pointing back that your organization is a professional organization. We've had so many times where we've had people with inappropriate Facebook comments and those kinds of things, and nothing with delete is never deleted. So that needs to be stressed, and they need to sign a Facebook policy or a policy with any kind of social networking. It's everyone is using it now. It's widespread. But if they are going to represent your organization, you want to make sure it is appropriate what they are posting, and that should be made clear when you have your opening, onboarding, bring them on, your orientation. That should be discussed, as well as that should be something that they sign, that they are clear, because depending on what they post, it can be grounds for termination. And you want to make sure that you made it clear so that it will not be, I did not know. This is serious. We see it all the time. We are hearing it. It has to be addressed.
Oh my gosh, Nina, in the military, we have this thing where we say foot stomping something that's important. I can't foot stomp that enough for nonprofits where you're needing these donors, because that one person can post something, a photo, a message, or anything that can damage the image of that nonprofit. And then those dollars will stop coming in.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. You have got to drive it home, even with the employees that you have now. if you have not had the discussion, you should, even with them.
Catherine, you're muted, dear.
Thank you all so much. We have a final poll, I believe. We love to poll.
We do.
So much
We love
fun.
a poll.
And thank you all so very much. And this has been recorded. So we will let you know when it's available and how to capture it. So please complete the poll and submit.
No trick questions this time. Okay. Well, Catherine, it's 1 o'clock, so you can say your final goodbyes and thank yous to our panelists.
Yes. And Jill, do you have a final word? So as last time, our action item is to work with your teammates and your work family and go over where you are in your DEI assessment. And we have the tools. If you have other tools you would like to offer to share with others, we are happy to do that for you as well. Just email them on. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Kylie.
Thanks, you guys.
Bye, everyone. Enjoy your afternoon.